Let's face it, the wide receiver position is taking over fantasy football. Let's target the wide receivers that are going to win us our leagues, not the ones going to cost us games. And today I'm going over 5 must-draft wide receivers in 2025 fantasy football. Guys we need to be looking at in our draft at current average draft position. Let's not tease it anymore. Let's hop right into 5 must-draft wide receivers in fantasy football 2025. Now, these 5 guys are all inside the top 100 average draft position. Last season, Jamar Chase led our video as our must-draft wide receiver going in the middle of the first round. We thought he should have been going as the wide receiver 1 in fantasy. This season, our top wide receiver target is Nico Collins at his current ADP. Now, you're paying a hefty price tag on him, a late first-round pick for Nico. But I think he's one of the safer options down in the end of the first round, early second round range. He doesn't have question marks like some of these other wide receivers in this range. Now, I'm not necessarily fading these other wide receivers in the first round, but they do have some question marks that Nico Collins does not on his profile. League neighbors, he's dealing with some quarterback issues in New York with Russell Wilson and potentially Jackson Dart at some point. Puka Nacua, while he had a great season last year, now they bring in Devontae Adams. Brian Thomas now has to compete with Travis Hunter, who may be more talented than he is at the wide receiver position. I'm not necessarily fading these other wide receivers, but Nico Collins just doesn't have to deal with these question marks. He loses Stephon Diggs in free agency. He loses Tank Dell to most likely an injury that'll keep him out all of 2025. They bring in Christian Kirk to be that slot wide receiver. We're not really worried about that. They draft 2 Iowa State wide receivers. I don't think rookie wide receivers are going to be able to compete with what Nico Collins did last year. All the stats from 2024 suggest Nico is in for a monster year yet again. Last season, he finished as wide receiver 7 on a points per game basis. So he's already a top 10 wide receiver, and that's in a season where he was dealing with hamstring injuries that limited him in parts of the regular season. He missed a majority of 3 of the games he played in this year and still finished on a per game basis as wide receiver 7. And in games that he played over 50% of the snaps, he only finished 1 time in single digits. So he's double digits every single week he plays. He finished as the 3rd best yards per route run, which we know is one of the best statistics to project fantasy football production. So he's top 3 in yards per route run. He has a 25% team target share, and that was competing with Stephon Diggs and Tank Dell throughout the season. Now he's the clear-cut number 1 option in this offense. He's able to do all of this last season when the Houston Texans and CJ Stroud finished with the 25th most passing touchdowns in the league. So they're ranked near the bottom of the league in passing touchdowns in 2024, and he's still able to produce a top 10 finish at the wide receiver position. Now, if you don't think CJ Stroud improves on what he was able to do last year, I believe it's just a sophomore slump season. I expect him to be back a top 10 caliber quarterback this upcoming season. And if he does that and this Houston Texans passing offense increases its volume, Nico Collins, while wide receiver 7 last year, which is where he's going this year, I think that's his floor. I think you could be seeing a top 3 finish at the wide receiver position for Nico Collins, who doesn't have nearly any question marks like some of the other guys that are going in the first round. One of the main reasons I expect Collins to improve from wide receiver 7 last season, he has the 5th easiest strength of schedule for the wide receiver position. He's going to be facing very favorable matchups for him throughout the entire season with a very friendly schedule in 2025. With what we saw last year, with some expected improvement for CJ Stroud, I don't see how Collins can disappoint in fantasy football this year outside of injury. Next wide receiver I'm looking at is Jordan Addison. His ADP just doesn't make any sense to me. He's going as wide receiver 36 when last season he finished as wide receiver 21 on a points per game basis. That discrepancy blows my mind how he can go as a low-end wide receiver 3 when last year he was a mid wide receiver 2 on a per game basis. Jordan Addison, obviously he's only played 2 years in the NFL. He's never finished below wide receiver 30 in his career, yet this year we're drafting him at wide receiver 36. Now, maybe that goes for people that believe J.J. McCarthy is a huge downgrade from Sam Darnold, who they had at quarterback last year, which I don't know where they're getting that from. Sam Darnold's never been a good quarterback in the NFL until last season in this Minnesota Vikings offense. Maybe Kevin O'Connell is just a great offensive coach who knows how to put quarterbacks in positions to win. I mean, Sam Darnold had the best year of his career. Kirk Cousins looked amazing in Minnesota, and then he goes to Atlanta, and it all falls apart. We should not be discounting Jordan Addison from wide receiver 21 last year to an ADP of wide receiver 36 based on projected quarterback play. While J.J. McCarthy is a rookie quarterback after sitting out all of last season with injury, he was one of the best quarterbacks in the Big Ten his last year at Michigan. He was near the top in the Big Ten of yards per attempt, adjusted completion rate, and passing grade. So it's not like J.J. McCarthy cannot throw the football. He actually had the number one completion percentage in the Big Ten his final season. So if we expect Addison to fall off a cliff from this quarterback change, I'm going to take the discount on him from where we saw him finish both of his seasons in the National Football League with two different quarterbacks. This ADP is insane for a guy who's drafted in the first round of the NFL draft, a talented wide receiver who's shown in each of his first two seasons he can be a top 24 option. I'm not going to let him slip to ADP of 36 at the wide receiver position. I will take all of it, especially for his red zone production. He was top 10 in red zone targets. He had 10 touchdowns last season. If Justin Jefferson's still going to be a high-end first-round pick, I think Jordan Addison still needs to be considered as a top 24 option. Obviously, Justin Jefferson, a much better wide receiver overall, but Addison is no slouch in his own right. I will take the discount at wide receiver 36. Average draft position. Another wide receiver 2 in his offense, Jameson Williams. Similar to Addison, not as egregious, but he is being drafted as the 26th wide receiver off the board, when last season he finished as the wide receiver 20 on a per-game basis. So another discounted price this year based on Ben Johnson, offensive coordinator for the Lions, heading to Chicago. But the new offensive coordinator for the Detroit Lions, John Morton, he was the passing game coordinator for the Denver Broncos. Let's not forget, the Denver Broncos, they finished top 10 in passing yards and passing touchdowns. It's not like they have Patrick Mahomes. Bo Nix, a rookie quarterback who spent 5 or 6 years in college, comes in and looks pretty solid in Denver, especially the second half of the season. So if he's able to make it work with Bo Nix, I don't expect this Detroit Lions offense to take much of a hit this upcoming season. They do lose their center to retirement. That's going to affect the run game more than the passing game. I think Jameson Williams, a wide receiver 20 finish last year, guy who was near a top 15 wide receiver the second half of the season last year. Jameson Williams, another super talented wide receiver coming out of Alabama. A very explosive player. He was top 10 in yards after the catch, also top 10s in yards after the catch per reception, and he's got a top 20 win rate on his routes. So he's not only getting open, but when he does get open and catch the football, he is making something happen with it. Very explosive with that yards after the catch metric. The only guy really better than him is Jamar Chase, and he's the number one wide receiver in fantasy. So to finish as the wide receiver 20, now you're getting a 6-spot discount on him in drafts this year. When he's an ascending wide receiver, young, talented guy, I think he's just hitting the peak of his career. So I will definitely take another discount on a young, talented wide receiver, just like we did with Jordan Addison. The next wide receiver I am taking in all of my fantasy drafts is Chris Godwin for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. The main concern for Godwin is going to be that ankle injury he suffered halfway through the year last season. But I believe this injury concern is already baked into his price. He's going as wide receiver 30 off the board, when last year on a points per game basis, Chris Godwin quietly finished as the second best wide receiver in fantasy football. Yeah, only one wide receiver, only per game basis, was better than Chris Godwin last year, and that was Jamar Chase. Wide receiver 2 on a per game basis. Godwin was dominating in Tampa Bay with Baker Mayfield. He was the number 16 wide receiver, yards per route run. He was top 12 in target share, top 15 in route win rate, and 5 of the last 6 seasons, he finishes as a top 15 wide receiver. Now, you're drafting him at wide receiver 30. If that injury concern isn't already baked into that price, I don't know what you've been watching. Chris Godwin, obviously not one of the flashier wide receivers, but he just gets the job done year in and year out. What gives me so much confidence in drafting Chris Godwin, if the Buccaneers were so worried about Godwin's injury, they would have just given him a 3-year, $66 million contract this offseason. That contract tells me at age 29, Godwin still hasn't hit age 30 like Mike Evans has. The confidence to give him that contract tells me they feel okay about Godwin where he is with his injury. Obviously, it's going to be something for us to monitor as we get closer to draft season. But if you're telling me a guy who finished as the wide receiver 2 on a points per game basis is now going at wide receiver 30, when he's only finished below wide receiver 30 once in the past 6 years, and 5 of those years it's top 15, I have absolutely no problem drafting Chris Godwin with that in mind. I'm not really worried about Mecca Ibuka they drafted in the first round. I believe that's more of a Jackson Smith and Jigba type trend for him. I think the first 2 seasons he's going to sit behind Godwin and Evans like JSN did for Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf. And then you see that breakout in year 3 like we expect for JSN to continue this year without those options. So that, along with the injury, is the reason you're getting him at wide receiver 30. We don't need him to be the wide receiver 2 like he was last season. We just need him to finish inside the top 24 like he's done nearly every year of his career. So I think the risk is low on Godwin. If you're worried about the injury, you can pass. But at wide receiver 30, I'll be taking a lot of Chris Godwin. The last guy on my list is Chris Olave. Look, last year, Chris Olave was on our must-draft wide receiver list. And that did not end up so well for me. So one of the bigger busts in fantasy last year, a lot to do with the concussions he suffered. That is a concern for him this year. If he's going to suffer another early concussion, we might not see Chris Olave again. But at wide receiver 37 ADP, I'm going to roll the dice on a talented wide receiver. The New Orleans Saints invested multiple picks to trade up and draft early in the first round a couple seasons ago. Last year, in 6 healthy games, he was averaging double-digit fantasy points per game, right around 10 fantasy points a game, half PPR. So it's not like this guy was horrible when he played. He just missed most of the year with that concussion. A couple of the games the Saints played in, they were blowouts early in the year, so he wasn't utilized very much. But in 4 of those 6 games, Chris Olave still delivers 80-plus receiving yards, which is no surprise as he finished as a top 20 wide receiver in yards per route run and win rate on his routes. So it's a guy that knows how to get open. He's very efficient with his routes. It's just a matter of can he stay healthy and can Tyler Shuck provide enough of a floor for Chris Olave to provide value where you're drafting him at ADP wide receiver 37. I don't expect this Saints offense to be prolific by any means, but Tyler Shuck's a very old quarterback to be a rookie. It's not like he's an inexperienced guy, so that gives me faith that he can come in and run this offense, at least to not be a train wreck like we saw last year when Derek Carr went down. I think Shuck is experienced enough. He can provide value for Chris Olave. We know he has the talent. If he stays healthy, I think Chris Olave blows this ADP wide receiver 37 out the water. I think he finishes a low-end top 24 guy if he's able to stay healthy, which will provide us some value. So that's why I will be drafting Chris Olave again this season. Let's run it back with him. That's going to do it here. Those are 5 must-draft wide receivers inside the top 100. We'll have our sleepers video later on in this offseason for wide receivers. We started out with Nico Collins, Jordan Addison, Jameson Williams, Chris Godwin, and finished it with Chris Olave. Let me know what you think of these 5 guys in the comment section below. Hit that like button and subscribe for more fantasy football content. But that's going to do it here for us. We'll see you guys next week with another episode of the Fantasy Birds.